Welcome to Jester Bros Cartoon Travelers. Ahoy, mateys. A little bit out of order today. This is the podcast where my brother and I explore the vast and beautiful worlds
Yes.
of animation for the perfect place to call home. Now, I'm saying vast and beautiful, per the motto, per the typical thing that we always say, but it is Halloween month, my friends.
Woo! Well, technically, we kind of have two Halloween months. It's Halloween season at this point.
It is. We say Halloween month for September, October, and frankly,
November.
we're
No, I'm just
recording.
kidding.
We're recording our Halloween podcast a little bit out of order.
Yeah, we
so,
are.
podcast listeners, at least you're going to hear me introduce a future podcast like it's the very first time
Yeah.
that we are doing one for this season. But it is not deja vu. It is just the video in question is a little bit special, and we want to do it the right way. So
Yes.
just keep that in mind. It will be available podcast and
Yes,
video, but I
yes.
think it's going to be very fun.
We have a very, very amazing discussion coming up regarding Death, the Grim Reaper, and the Devil in animation. But we'll table that for another day. For today, we are going to be talking about Coraline, which, I mean, it takes place in Oregon. That's still beautiful.
That's true, though the version that we see is pretty gray, and we'll get into that.
That's true.
Lou, did you know that Coraline is having a moment right now?
A moment?
Yes.
Like the character?
Coraline, the movie,
Oh, okay.
has been re-released in theaters and having major box office success this year.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. I'll go check it out, though.
Yeah,
That's
it's
awesome.
true. A lot of people who have never seen Coraline before are finding it. They're loving it. They're finding out, wow, this is a great Halloween movie.
Oh, yeah.
And
And for me, it's one of the best. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Coraline is an animated film by Leica Studios, which is actually based in Oregon. And it's based on a children's novel of the same story, where a little girl finds a portal inside of her home to a sort of mirror world, let's say, without spoiling anything.
No, that's a great summary.
Yeah.
I think that for a lot of people, this is like the pinnacle bridge movie between animated kids movie versus horror.
Yes. Yes.
You know, I'd say it can be called just appropriate enough to be considered like kid-friendly or family-friendly, but maybe not even.
This is what I'm excited to talk about today. So, everybody, you know that usually the formula for this podcast that we do is we're trying to find a place to call home, and we're not going to sugarcoat it. The location in Coraline, which is the mirror world I was alluding to, is pretty much just a straight up horror show, and there's not much of an argument for wanting to live there, right?
So I actually do think that I do agree. Yes, that we're not going to live there.
Yes,
but I do think there's two different philosophies that are probably going to make for some very ripe discussion. Yes. I know that Lou has something in mind, and I have something in mind, and they're actually different thought streams.
Yes. I have two different things in mind.
Okay. So who knows?
I'll start off with. So what I will say, just for those who are interested, because I want you to stick to the end, and this is what I think is going to be a fun conversation, is the genre of children's horror and how much we should challenge children with horror, and where does horror fit in the kids' entertainment experience. I think that's a really interesting conversation, but I also think that there's a little bit of the philosophy of kind of the Wizard of Oz mentality of there's no place like home, and if there were a parallel dimension where things genuinely were a little better, is it worth it to leave your life to go to that place? Now, obviously, in this situation, it's all dark and twisted, so obviously in the dark and twisted world, you don't go there. But what if it actually was better? Would you go there? I think that's interesting.
That is the exact thing that I am interested in.
Yeah, all right.
I'm interested in both, but that was where I was originally coming into this episode.
Sure.
I hadn't thought about your idea, and I actually do think that is very interesting as well. I will specify, we call this a mirror world. The canonical title of it would be called The Other World.
Thank you.
This mirror dimension that Coraline escapes into that appears at the surface to be a better version of her family home, with these characters with button eyes that just seem a little bit nicer and everything is a little bit more magical and
Yep.
clearly everything is fine.
And the food does look very delicious.
It sure does. So I think I'm ready to blast off to the other world. Are you?
Let's launch. Let's launch right off.
And here we go. So there's two dichotomies at play here.
That's what a
We do
dichotomy
have-
is. There's always two. Sorry.
All right, fine. It's not a trichotomy for a reason. Now, we have this home that is technically in Ashland, Oregon, which is a real town in this state.
Beautiful town, too. I love Ashland.
Yeah, the version that we see is more ashy than perhaps the real one.
Well, I think they're just kind of putting on the horror vibe for it. You know, they're like, it's like Oregon in the winter and it's rainy and stuff. But, actually, I'm going to let everyone continue to believe that Oregon is just rainy all the time. Don't come here. It's terrible.
There you go. Yeah, you got a little bit of your seasonal affective disorder taking place in Coraline.
Yeah, I'll pretend that that's a thing in Oregon. Let's go. No, I'm just kidding.
We have the Pink Palace apartments. So we kind of have some residents here that are a little bit kooky.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
You know, it's a different place that is meant to feel a little bit dreary, a little bit sad. Not like the worst ever, not any like true trauma, just like not very happy.
I kind of disagree a little bit because it's got a lot of it's got a lot of pop to it too. Like the old ladies are hilarious and full of zest and full of life and full of fun. And so is the acrobat guy who lives on the roof. You know what I mean?
That's true.
They're and very very Oregon people too. Like a lot of just kooky eccentric personalities, and I think that also fits the bill. But you're right, in general they do portray it as very dreary. And this kid just moved here with their family, so you've got the kids new in town and not sure if they really wanted to move, whole thing. We're all familiar with stories like that. There's a million of them. And she doesn't quite get along with her parents that well. I actually have thoughts about her mom, and there's a whole philosophical thing I actually like going into about her relationship with her mom, but that's not what we're talking about today.
Yeah, and you can imagine how being a child in this situation feels dreary, and I do think that we are meant in the beginning to see that from her point of view.
100%.
I'm looking for the whimsy, I'm looking for the magic, and maybe these people at this apartment that doesn't seem exciting to a child, they've lived a life and they have found zest in the simplicity, which is magical in its own way.
You say simplicity, but these people don't live simple lives. This dude is a circus man who like trains rats to be in a rat circus.
That's true.
That's
far from
crazy.
simple.
These ladies have like 500 stuffed dead dogs.
Okay. You're right. The people are strange. I think that is definitely safe to say. And even the little kid who lives nearby, I think it's Weibly.
Yeah, I love him. He's a great character.
I do love him too, but he's also like a little bit eccentric, a bit of an offbeat kid, which you would think makes sense for a kid like Coraline. Oh, this could be my friend. But she even sees him as, this kid's just annoying.
Yeah, totally.
And she gets this opportunity to be in a version of this world that is just more whimsical, more magical, more the type of exciting, imaginative life that she would love to be part of.
Oh, and the special effects,
right there.
special effects they do for the tunnel that she goes through to get there, everybody. If you haven't seen this movie, if you haven't already had enough signs to go see it, this is the one.
Shout out to Leica Studios that makes a lot of really good underrated stuff.
Yeah.
Coraline is their most popular, but they make other things too. And
yeah, they did Paranorman. They did Frankenweenie too, I think.
Yep, they did.
Oh no, that was Tim Burton.
I believe that they were part of it. I could be wrong about that. They definitely did Box Trolls.
Oh, that was really good too, actually. I really liked that.
Yeah, and there's all these movies that you might have heard about, but you don't realize that they're actually pretty good, and Leica has made them. So,
yeah.
I love the picture that they paint with this concept. And I can't give credit to Leica for the concept because that would be the original source material, the author of Coraline.
Yeah, of course.
Who I admit I don't know the name off the top of my head, so
Yeah, I don't
sorry
remember
about that.
either.
But look it up, and they deserve credit.
Yeah, great story.
Um, and yeah, I think that could we just start out of the gate because, of course, we're gonna be spoiling it a little bit, everybody.
Yeah,
You could
there's no
tell
way around it.
based on the way we were talking about it, you know that this place that actually seems magical is kind of like a horror movie setting, and
Yeah.
it's not everything that she thinks it is.
You know, I'm usually not the guy to say this because I like watch retention, but truly, if you haven't seen the movie, stop listening to this and go watch it and come back. I actually mean it. I don't care about watch
Uh,
retention. It's good for you. I care about you, the audience. You should go watch this film first. That's your last
yeah,
warning.
it's great. It's perfect for spooky season,
Yeah.
which is why we were really excited to talk about it this round. I really do want to talk about this general idea of if you knew that you could go through that door and it would make things a little bit better, is it worth it? And I think it's complicated because we see, of course, in Coraline's case, it's deceiving. You know, it
Of
might
course.
seem like it's better, but in actuality, you know, she gets back home, and again, we're spoiling it at this point. It turns out that the world she left was not as bad as she had made it out to be in her head. She had sort of like created this idea that it's boring and dry, but her parents had a bad week, and then they come back and they do love her. And, you
Yeah.
know, it does get a little bit better. And I think maybe even the weather improves a bit.
So, this is where the philosophy of that whole thing gets interesting to me because let's just pretend because usually you're in a situation in our culture where you're just kind of bound to your parents, right?
Mhm.
And you deal with them no matter what they're like. And maybe they're not so great all the time. We like to pretend that parents are always good at parenting, but they're not. Let's be real. And I read a book by Aldous Huxley called The Island, where there's like it's kind of like a it's kind of like a utopia philosophical thought experiment a little bit like what an idyllic society would look like. And you know, not going to get into that very much, but in that book there's an idea that instead of having a parental system that were common within, you know, the United States where what's it called,
The
the
nuclear family.
nuclear family dynamic, thank you, instead of having that, he suggests that children get to actually, once they're born, they actually experience several months to a year with different parental figures, with different parenting styles. And they, at the end, all kind of decide who fits best for each other. Right?
Okay.
And it makes me think that if there were a system like that, like with Coraline's parents, makes you wonder if there were theoretically better parents that would take your kids if you weren't a good parent, would you try to be a better one?
You mean if that was baked into the system?
Like, let's say, again, like, let's say in this thought experiment, Coraline legitimately, like, did find better parents in this world. But then the
Yes.
parents of her now recognize that there is a chance that she actually could have a life with parents that treat her better. Does that make the parents better parents?
Well, okay, I will say that there is a literal parallel in that there are social workers that go to kids' houses who may have potentially abusive parents
Well,
or
yeah,
true problematic
but
behavior.
they don't bring
Potentially.
you to better parents. They just bring you away from your bad parents. That's
And then
different.
the hope is that they find
Yeah, the hope that
parents
has
who can
no
adopt
backing
them.
behind it, and it's a terrible system. We're not talking
Well,
about that system.
no, I see your point. I just want to make sure that I recognize that there is somewhat of a framework where
Sure.
sometimes a parent could lose their child to better parents if they do not get their act together. You're not thinking about it in terms of necessarily true trauma. Are you thinking about it in terms of
True
just
I'm saying skip the orphan phase.
okay?
Instead of having like oh, my parents are literally the worst to where they're legally not allowed to have children. I'm not talking about that.
Uh, right. You're really just saying if I am doing a bad job as a parent, would I do a better job
If
if
you
I knew
knew
that
that,
I didn't get to keep my kid if I was doing bad?
not even if you were doing that bad, if they just didn't like you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm not necessarily going to go down the thought of experiment of that being a real scenario. I'm trying to take it with the philosophy of which I think it's intended.
Well, you have to
Um,
think of it as a real scenario if you're taking it with that philosophy.
okay. Well, I think that yes, I think that parents may do a better job if they felt like that threat was real. However, I do
Question then
think that
is, should we implement a system like that? Just food for thought. There's nothing we can do about it. I'm just a
so
guy talking
I'm
on the
just gonna
internet, but
say the huge problem with that is simply that parenting is wildly subjective and outcomes for children are also unbelievably complicated that go well beyond parenting and into all
sure,
kinds of sociology and symbolic interactionism that help
sure.
make up a kid's life with all the people they interact with.
Well, and I'm sure a lot of people
Um,
listening to this have also been raised with very hyper individualistic societies, and the idea that the way that I do things is good. The book that I was reading that I was referring to recently is very much more based on communitarian philosophy.
mhm.
And there are a lot of family dynamics where people don't have an intense feeling of individual personality. Their whole sense of identity is based on the group dynamic and what benefits the community. We don't really have that great of a sense of community in the United States these days. Most people don't, in my opinion, comparatively. To like generations of families who have lived together that are like hundreds of people large and they all know each other. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like a family of 6 and maybe your next extemporaneous family members. Not really the same vibe. And how the parenting goes is very different too, because instead of two parents basing their entire sense of self-worth on how to raise a kid, they have a huge community of people to help with it, and it makes a really big difference.
Yeah, and some parents thrive by having extra community resources at their disposal. And,
Yeah.
I would say that a lot
I'd
of
say that
successful
I'd
parents
say most people thrive with having extra community resources at their disposal, regardless of context.
definitely. And I will say that parenting is something that's very hard, and sometimes having those resources helps.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think that we can fully cover it without also just mentioning that there's a biological component to a baby being born. And there are
Yeah.
a lot of actual like physiological needs, especially like within the first year or so,
Sure.
that biologically it's going to help them the most if that's their actual mother. Now, that does not mean that that mother turns into a good parent, nor does it mean that the father is a good parent or that the father is even there.
Or that it's
Um,
necessary. I mean, sometimes mothers die and the kid survives and they can still make it.
right. But I just wanted to also mention that the idea of a circular parenting system, there's a lot of very like tangible reasons why that could be a huge challenge to actually execute, whether it was a good idea or whether it wasn't. Um,
Oh, well, I mean, obviously. I mean, just change I mean, changing the structure of anything is difficult, you know, especially when it's
yes.
so baked into our culture.
But yeah, I mean, I do think that regardless of their parenting, that kids grow up with a lot of different influences from a lot of different places. And to kind of still keep it within the framework of this part of the discussion about, Coraline trying to choose this better world.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I think that it does open an especially interesting question when you mentioned, well, what if the kids just didn't like you and that was enough?
Yeah.
I think that it would be like too narrow to try to measure parental success based on whether the kid was enjoying it or not, obviously
Sure.
within actual limits.
Sure, sure.
um so
Well, like,
I
yeah, in the book that I was reading, because I don't want to make people think that the book that I was reading was half baked, because it was written by a brilliant guy, and they like really go into the philosophy of how it works in that book. Um, but it would be more complicated than that. I don't have time to fully diagnose how it would work. You know what I mean? Because we're not
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about that book. We're talking about Coraline.
definitely. And I do think that discussion becomes especially more interesting if it's an adopted child that has no biological needs from the original parent.
Well,
um
actually, that's kind part of the philosophy is that they think that it's better to have a situation where the biological parent isn't fully known to the kid because it doesn't mess with their sense of identity.
okay, from a social perspective I can sort of understand that, but I do think that it is missing like a certain level of actual scientific importance if you're going to look at it
I,
from that
I think you
framework.
should read it before basing that on what I'm telling you about it.
Well, that's fair because you're not giving me everything. All I'm
Yeah,
hearing is the parts of it that you're delivering. And you
yeah.
recognize
That
that
are
it's
specifically related to Coraline, because I'm not trying to get into the weeds. We're not talking about Aldous Huxley here.
fair enough. Well, I do think that if Coraline was actually in a situation where this is a little bit better, presumably,
Yeah.
I think that
It makes sense to take it, right?
so I'm not convinced. I think
Okay.
it depends on how much better. I think that sometimes you might find like people go through this in relationships,
Yeah.
right? Where they end a relationship because of all these things that really frustrated them about a person.
Sure.
And then they find another person that has all of the best qualities that that other person was
Yeah.
missing that you were getting frustrated with.
Totally.
Then you end up in a relationship with them and oh, I didn't realize there's also all of these other problems that this
Yep.
other person didn't have.
Yep.
And I just didn't notice it because I was looking for the thing that I was lacking.
Yeah.
And
I think
I
that's
would be
a great point.
I would be nervous about that happening if I were to enter a situation like this, especially
Totally.
for something as high stakes as who's going to parent me. Because
Yeah.
maybe I want somebody responsible versus somebody fun, for
Totally.
example.
Well, and especially when you're a kid, because, like you said about the relationship thing, as we have more relationships and interact, not just romantically, but just relationships with anybody, we get better as we get older at figuring out what our needs are and what other people and how other people fit in our lives.
Yeah.
And when you're a kid, your sense of that might not be so good. So it might be easier for you to walk into a Hansel and Gretel trap, for example, because you want the parent that's going to give you, free time and stuff. But I still like the idea. So this is the interesting part, right? Because that's why I started saying, like, as a parent, how would you feel if that was the system? Because as a kid, your sense of judgment is much less good. You know what I mean? And it's hard for me to argue that the kid will make the right choice because we're all learning. Kids make wrong choices all the time, and that's part of learning,
Yeah, and adults make wrong choices all the time, but they
Totally.
do have a deeper wealth of experiences to pull from,
Yeah,
and that's the difference.
totally. Um, so then so then for me, the interesting question with like how to approach it from Coraline's perspective is the what I want to focus on, I should say, the interesting to me part is the no place like home dynamic, right? Because a lot of times in a story like this, you'll have a situation where, you will find a place that's actually really cool and you find cool people that you resonate with. But eventually, a lot of times in stories like that, your protagonist ends up being like, but you know what? It's just not home. And all I know, I just need to go back to the home that I know because there's no place like home. I think that's a whole load of crap, personally.
Yeah, I've seen stories do it both ways, where
Yeah.
that's the message, and then total opposite of no, like adventure is out there.
Yeah,
It's not at my hometown. Like I've got to
exactly.
get out
You
and
got
see
to
the
get out
world.
and experience life. The reason I like bringing attention to that aspect of the philosophy is because a lot of people will watch Coraline and feel like I kind of resonate with Coraline because she doesn't get along with her parents, but maybe the person who feels that way genuinely has like abusive parents. You know what I mean? So then
Sure.
when they hear that there's no place like home philosophy, it kind of messes with them a little bit because they're like, oh, maybe I should just accept my terrible parents despite the fact that they're totally horrible to me. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And
Yeah.
I think that can be a confusing ethic to come out of stories like this. Because sure, in Coraline's case, the other parents ended up being like really scary and obviously like a trap. But what if you're born in the trap? How about this? What if
Yeah.
ready for this scenario? What if Coraline was born in the other world? Imagine if there was another daughter that was trying to switch with Coraline to have her parents. Then
I just got chills.
is it messed up for Coraline to rob that child of that experience when she just tried to throw it away?
Whoa. And would you still question, is this really better or is it a trap, even if you are coming from the
Yeah.
trap? It's
Even if
hard
you're
to know
coming.
that you're in a trap when you're in one.
Because it's the fish can't see
It's
the
what you
water.
know.
Yeah, exactly. It's just what you know. And so it ends up being really difficult because, especially when you're a kid, you kind of got to, in my opinion, if you're a kid, you should kind of eventually start asking the questions of, how much do I trust my parents? How much can they realistically help me in certain situations? Because they're not infallible. It's important to recognize the limitations of any of your And even in non-family dynamics, your boss, any, your I don't know what other leadership roles there are. You know what I mean though.
Any kind of authority figure, you got to
Exactly.
recognize that nobody is perfect,
Yeah.
whether it's a parent or anyone else. And you're right, starting to question that and just wonder, even are the things that I am being taught fair?
Yeah.
You know, are they something that I should be thinking harder about to know if I need to rethink my worldview a little bit?
Yeah.
I grew up this way. Does that necessarily mean it's true that it's right? Uh, yeah, I mean, I think that it's fascinating. Um, and frankly, I think it's really hard to answer.
Yeah, I
Like,
know,
I
me too.
can't tell you if I was in the trap, if I was in the other world and I was trying to leave to get
Yeah.
out, I want to say yes, I would have the instincts to know this is better.
Yeah.
But would I really? Would I? I don't know. Especially me being the person that I am.
Yeah.
It would change me though. I would not be the person I am because
Yeah.
of the scenario that I grew up. I'd be a complete. So it's almost even hard to answer the question from the framework
Yeah.
of a completely different socialized Alec in every single fathomable way.
And something I also want to point out is Alec and I have like phenomenal parents. They are really awesome. We have a great relationship with our family, and we're beyond blessed that that is the case.
It makes it
Uh,
easier to have this discussion
yeah, exactly.
from a like outside perspective with that
Yeah.
in mind.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, like I remember when we were kids, I think my dad would only put me on a leash and throw me under a car a couple times. No, I'm just
Stop
kidding.
it.
I'm just totally kidding. Totally kidding.
The kind of joke he would make too.
Yeah, I know. It totally is. But that joke was just to emphasize the point is sometimes you really don't know when you were born into a situation that's really totally unfair to you. And I think that having thought experiments of like what we're going through of if there is a better reality that you can find a way to situate yourself in, I don't think that you should feel like you shouldn't go for it because you owe it to the people who gave birth to you. I don't believe in that. You don't owe them shit. They did that without your consent. You were here you were sucked into this world without your approval. I mean, metaphysically, you might, metaphysically, who knows? Maybe we did make a choice. But based on what we know, we can't be sure about that, you know?
Okay. I love how we talked that through because I think that we were able to pin down what that conversation was and wasn't and end in a
Yeah.
very interesting place.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And we don't really
Um,
have a solid answer. Sorry, everyone. You got to answer that one
It's
yourself.
hard. Well, but I do agree with you, because sometimes it's not even a parent thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes you're just born into geography that is extremely disadvantaged.
Totally. And there's another thing. Do you leave your family when you kind of wish you could help them, but you need to get out yourself too? That's even harder. I don't even want to get into that one. That's
I know.
beyond me, you know?
I know. Yeah, who knows? Maybe there'll be another animated feature or show in the future where that I guess creates that conversation.
Oh yeah.
But
Leave a comment if you actually know of a show or a movie, some art form that tackles that idea, because I'd love to see it.
yeah, that would be interesting because I think it would be a longer, more focused talk.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, again, and I'm sorry to not really fully answer it, but I do think that posing the question is interesting. Coming away with the takeaway, if you're in a toxic situation, at the end of the day, we advocate for getting out.
Yes.
Whatever that is.
Yeah. I think that's a good way to wrap that up.
And just, being honest about yourself, trying to take note of your situation,
Totally.
talk to people that you do trust, look for resources that you do trust,
Yeah.
and see
And-
if you can parse that out.
And if you're not sure, yeah, like look at let's if you're a young person and you're wondering if you have good parents, look at parenting models from different cultures. We have the internet. If you're listening to this, look up how people do it in other countries.
Yeah.
Um
And also know you do grow up and you do have the ability to have the freedom and leave, and you are not bound to them forever.
yeah, well, usually, depending on at least in our cultural framework, that's how it works. That's not necessarily how it works everywhere, unfortunately.
Yes, that's fair. Okay. I loved that.
Yeah, that's good.
So,
Children's
do you want
horror?
to- Yeah, let's move into that other part of this talk that you want to have.
I'm so stoked. Okay, so I've been watching this YouTube philosophy. Shout out to Tail Foundry, a really awesome YouTube channel. If you guys like philosophy of art, if you like this channel, I bet you like Tail Foundry. So they were talking about. I actually watched their video on Coraline, which made me think about it. And they were talking about the genre of children's horror and if children like to be scared, and how much children like to be scared, and what, especially because this is a common topic in censorship, what is too scary for kids? What is, stuff like that. And I mean, just to set the framework, just like adults, the horror genre is not for everybody.
Yes.
Obviously. You know what I mean? Not all kids.
It's not for me.
Yeah, not all kids should have to go through horror films. I don't think that, like, we should be like, every kid should watch The Exorcist by the time they turn 13 years old. You know what I mean? That's ridiculous. However, I think that it's important to recognize that lots of kids really do love being challenged, even when they are scared. And in that video that I was talking to you about, the Tale Foundry one, somebody said, I remember when I was watching Coraline as a kid with my parents. And they looked at me during one of the scarier scenes and they said, "Is this too scary for you? Do you want me to turn it off?" And I said, "No, I'm not scared at all. I'm really interested. This is just really interesting." And they said that they lied. They were really scared. But they were afraid that if they told their parents that they were scared, that they wouldn't let them finish the story. And what that shows me is that the parents were so afraid of just letting the kid be afraid that they didn't let the kid challenge themselves to get through the fear. And getting through fear is what literal bravery is. You know what I mean? And if you don't allow kids to experience trying to test their bravery and trying to test them pushing their boundaries and accept weird, strange things, then I think that it's going to limit their life in a way that you won't be able to understand at the time.
Wow. Okay. So, full disclosure, everybody, Lou sent this video to me. He's like, "Oh, I really want to get your thoughts on this." And I don't know if I've said this canonically on the podcast or YouTube, but the easiest way to get me to stop a text thread is to send me a video.
Yeah, no, you've told me that.
Lou knows. I don't know if the audience knows.
I sent it anyway just because I wanted him to see it.
I'm so bad. I'll look at it. I'll be like, okay, that seems interesting. But I rarely feel like I have 2 interrupted minutes because I really plan out my whole day. And I always devote myself time to be doing things. So I'll see a video and I'll be like, well, I'm going to have to wait until I have 10 minutes of uninterrupted time to give this. And then next thing I know, it's been 3 weeks and I completely forgot that this friend sent me a video that I was supposed to watch.
That's so funny. See, I have stuff I literally have videos running in the background right now as we're doing this, just so that I can sit still.
Yes. that is very funny. So Lou sent me this and I meant to watch it. I didn't. So I'm going to be coming at it from perspective of having not watched that. However, the way that you explained that, I actually thought was pretty brilliant.
Thanks.
Yes, and I don't know if you thought that I would immediately have an adverse reaction to that point.
No, I didn't. I actually thought that I thought you'd really love the video, and I think that you would greatly appreciate it. However, I would also like to point out that this is fun for us to talk about because Alec hated getting scared as a kid. He hated it, and I liked it. I like the challenge of horror. I'm not a huge slasher film horror genre fan in general as an adult, to be honest. But I liked it more as a kid, almost. To be fair.
Yeah. I will not say that I've never liked anything horror. Frankly, I love Coraline, and I think Coraline is legitimately scary.
Oh, same. Well, that's why I like the genre of children's horror. Because it's scary, but it's supposed to be scary for a younger audience.
Yeah, it's digestible. And I have always liked that. You know, I would enjoy spooky season. I'm sure we've talked about on the podcast how we would love to watch some of these Halloween-y, fun, scary things.
You know what I'd put in children's horror as well? There aren't a lot of examples out there, in my opinion. Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated I put in children's horror.
Great, I agree. And that's another one that it's a little bit more challenging. It's going to get your heart racing a little bit. You're going to be paying attention to what you're watching, but it's not necessarily traumatizing.
Exactly.
And this is where I draw the line, and I think that people are too quick to show their kids some things. There is a huge difference between Coraline and Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Totally. But on that note, what I also want to say is trauma is part of life. Unfortunately, I wish that wasn't the case, but it is. And weird things traumatize kids. You know what I mean?
That's fair.
I can think of a million PG-rated films that have traumatized kids in history. You know what I mean? For one reason,
and probably
or another.
At least a few that really bothered you.
Sure. I mean, do you remember that Eggo waffle commercial we watched that scared the living daylights out of both of us?
I do. Our mom called Eggo to complain.
Yeah.
And they changed the commercial.
They
We're
did.
assuming
They
a
took
lot
it
of other
down.
people complained too.
Yeah.
There was something about it. It scared both of us a lot.
I found it on YouTube recently. I watched it
probably
again.
It probably scared a lot of other children as well, is what I would think.
But it was really just a cartoony jump scare animated face at the end of the day, which doesn't really have anything traumatic about it. It's not murder. It's not any terrible, horrible atrocity that would traumatize you if you experienced it. but it was a jump scare that was enough that every time the commercial came on, Alec and I were like, nope, we out of here. And now, for me, that was a valuable experience. I'm glad I had that experience. That's a memory that I hold with me, and I'm like, I don't think of that memory. And even though at the time it was really scary, it's trauma light. You know what I mean? It was scary enough that it sat with me, and even when I think about it, I still get a little unnerved. But in a way, it was almost like a soft introduction to trauma for when the times that I had real trauma that were actually really bad. I'd already dipped my foot in the pool a little bit, so maybe it was easier to deal with in the future, you know?
Okay, I think that's really interesting, and why you talk about the children's horror genre as being different.
Yeah.
Because I do think jumping right into it is a lot.
Yeah.
And it can be kind of damaging for a kid's psyche if they are truly not ready to see something on a screen that's gonna like really just haunt their nightmares for the rest of their life.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think I saw the Poltergeist when I was pretty young. Now, I watched a lot of horror shows when I was a kid, because I couldn't help it. Like, whenever Dad was watching something scary on TV, especially if it was really scary, I'd be like, oh man, that's creepy. I wonder what's going on.
You know what I mean?
liked
it. But this is so interesting, the difference between us, right? And I think this captures your point perfectly.
Yeah.
Where I would see that stuff and I ran the other way.
Yeah.
So it was a
that's
difference
true.
of maybe Mom and Dad didn't want either of us to watch it, but Lou wanted to be challenged and I did not.
Yeah.
It was not for me.
Yeah.
So,
and for what it's worth, what I think our parents did well is they gave you the freedom to not, and they gave me the freedom too.
You're right. That's actually totally true.
Yeah.
And
now I'm a little monster and you're a stand-up member of society. So, no, I'm just kidding.
Well, it's so funny because genuinely, the horror phenomenon in the way that a lot of people experience it, I do understand it a little bit, but it's definitely not something that like I can relate to or internalize. I can't put myself in the frame of being of other people who love to be scared by the kind of stuff that is available for viewing right now. To really seek out stuff that is going to give them nightmares, to make them leave the movie theater feeling bad.
Yeah.
And I don't really get it,
well,
but at the same time, it makes you feel something. And it does challenge you.
I think leaving the movie theater feeling bad is actually the difference in perspective of whether or not that's something you like. If you don't like
the type of bad that you feel.
Yeah, because like after I leave a horror film, if it's a good movie in my opinion, I shouldn't leave feeling bad. I should leave feeling excited about the experience that I had. You know what I mean?
Great example would be Get Out. Which is a horror movie that a lot of people love.
I don't think
that came out not that long ago, where it's not just known for being a good horror movie, but being a good movie.
Sure.
Right?
Oh, yeah. Or The Shining,
think.
too. The Shining the same way.
Sure. Like there's artistic value, but and I understand because I actually saw The Shining and I quite liked it, despite the problematic things that go into the making of that film. I do think it's a great film.
Oh, yeah. Stanley Kubrick was a monster. He's my favorite director, but he was a horrible human being. I can admit that.
Sure. So it's like, I never got anything out of it, but I'm not out here telling the people who love the horror genre that they should put it away. And, there's something wrong with them psychological for it, because that would be silly.
Now, those of you that listen to crime dramas all the time, there's something wrong with you. No, I'm just kidding.
Another thing that I don't understand, but it's so popular in pop culture.
I get that too, actually. I hate to say it. It's a feeling. It makes you feel alive. And we live in a society where there's so very little actual threat. Maybe not all of us, but a lot of us live in a society where there's so very little actual physical threat to our existence that there's almost like a weird feeling like we need to satisfy that part of our biology, I think.
Maybe, but I think a lot of people, they get into that stuff and it makes them feel like there are real threats everywhere when the chances of something happening to you are so microscopically small.
Like the crime drama stuff, if you listen to that all the time.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think that's good to have in your head all the time, 100%. Honestly, it's probably not great to consume slasher stuff like all the time either, because too much of anything is bad for your brain,
Sure.
I mean, hell, dude, even too much SpongeBob is probably going to rot your brain in some way. You know what I
Well, hey,
mean?
no, but you've got a good point because there's also like a lot of science that shows that some extremely fast-paced kids content is not great for kids development. They need
Yeah,
things that are slower.
totally.
Um, and
What?
that's not necessarily horror.
The attention span of our generation doesn't lend any credence to that theory at all. What are you talking about?
Yeah, and then we could get into screen time and all of that.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, I kind of wanted to go back to Coraline as a specific example because coincidentally, I knew that we were going to be talking about this 2 or 3 days ago. I heard from my friend who has a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. The 4-year-old, I don't know at what point they were exposed to it, how, why.
Okay.
They love Coraline,
Of course.
specifically Coraline.
Sure.
And
Yeah. It's a cool
this year
4-year-old
they
in
were
my
like,
opinion.
hey, Mom, Dad, I want to watch Coraline again. Like, that's the movie that I want to watch. And they're like, okay, sure. So because it was in theaters that they've been having it circulate, they were able to take her to the theaters.
Let's go, dude.
And
That's hype.
they
I love
loved
that.
it.
I love that.
They
That's
had
so
a
cool.
great experience. And it's so funny because me as a parent would say, there is no way I'm going to show you Coraline when you're 3 or 4 years old. Like, I wouldn't.
What if they
wouldn't-
ask?
Well, okay, if they asked, then I would probably just give them a preface of, you're welcome to watch this, just know what it is.
Yeah. Might be a little scary.
But it's like there's 100 other films that I would probably introduce first, knowing that this one could be a little bit intense out of the gate.
Well,
And
see, but that's
it
where
made me realize
when it comes to parenting philosophy, that's where you got to let your own bias not come in. You know what I mean? Because like
right, you lean at what the kid is into.
Exactly.
And I think that you do start to learn. You start to learn what they're enjoying and what they are able to handle.
Yeah.
And that's what our parents did. They knew what you could handle and they knew what I could handle.
You know how in school, now look, I know we all have issues with how public school systems work, but we're not talking about that. In school, it's kind of nice that there's a lot of problems with it, but it's really nice that you get a bunch of different academic interests that you're exposed to because you can kind of figure out what you like. Science, art, gym, are you a physical activity person? Are you a theater person? There's a lot of stuff for you to explore. And I think that is a great thing that we could take away from this conversation is, just giving your kid variety. Give them a little children's horror and see if they gravitate to it. Give them a little stupid SpongeBob, see if they gravitate to it. Give them a little Power Rangers, a little anime, Give them, hell, maybe give them something more intense and adult if you're feeling like they're climbing up fast in that regard, Because different kids want different levels of maturity. And for that matter, so do adults. I know adults that will listen to just watch Jersey Shore all day and completely have not a single interesting or remarkable thought in their lives. And that is their choice.
Yeah,
You know
and
what
I
I mean?
also think there is being something to be said for picking the correct gateway choice for these different genres.
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
Because
I think there are good gateways. Yeah,
and
that's a great
Coraline
point.
actually is a decent one.
Great one. Great point.
Because it does a happy medium. You could say that this is part of the horror genre, but it is, in theory, family appropriate.
Yeah.
Think about if an adult has never watched an anime before, and you show them, I don't know, Food Wars. I can imagine that going really, really bad. Can you, Lou?
You are giving you don't understand anime. It could go bad if you're a No, I'm just kidding.
So I'm using a real example because Lou showed me Food Wars way too early into my anime journey, and it was a lot for me.
Alec, if you're not really horribly sexually repressed, I don't think that would be an issue.
I'm not going to get into my issues with Food Wars. It's beyond that. But
I think that, again, that's a thing that I don't think that necessarily is a bad gateway anime. I think it's a telling gateway anime. Because it showed me that you're not interested in a huge part of anime.
That's true.
Whereas that is a great gateway for understanding if people will like that whole genre of anime, which I do. I think it's very fun. I love the over-the-top, comically sexual thing sometimes. I think it's very funny, as long as it's not, like, predatory in any way. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. But that's a good point. Sometimes you are introducing things and seeing what sticks, what gravitates, what doesn't.
Yeah. So, like, just for the sake of conversation, and commenters, let me know what you think too. What do you think is a good gateway to a Disney film? Because that's your expertise. I'm curious.
So I've thought a lot about this.
Yeah.
I think I've said on the show already that I'm going to be a new dad, and I love thinking about the kinds of things that I'm really excited to show my child.
And new
Um,
dads need financial support, so don't forget to become a member and like the channel and subscribe and all that good stuff. Sorry, continue.
no, you're fine. Um, and it's interesting because I think that there are different approaches that you could do. A lot of people will say that a movie like Cinderella is a terrible gateway because they think that it's so tropey in the way that it portrays um you know a relationship of, oh, they got married in one night. But having rewatched Cinderella, I actually think that it's a very tame, easy film to get introduced to a lead character and really root for them. And I think there's a lot of themes there that people actually undersell for that film. And I
Sure.
also think that something that people forget, when a kid is really little, they're not processing a
Yeah.
lot
Oh yeah.
of
Like the complex social situations of adults.
Exactly. Not to say that they can't register with some things and internalize some things, especially as they get a little bit older.
Yeah,
But
like
I'm
I
actually
think kissing the sleeping woman is probably not a good moral for anyone, right?
sure.
That's bad.
Uh, sure. But a lot of these fairy tales, they're not watching for that. You
Yeah.
know, they're watching to experience a little bit of magic, a little bit of, a lot of great imagery and color, and
Totally.
maybe a snowman that laughs a lot. You know,
Totally.
and I know that people don't
No.
necessarily love Frozen.
You're not saying Frozen is the
It's not my
gateway, are
answer.
you? Okay,
It's not,
cool.
it's not my answer, but I'm saying that
Actually,
Frozen
I wouldn't
is
have judged you, actually. I'm totally playing.
it is a really palatable movie for young children. And, I think that has a lot less of the
Okay.
problematic tropes too. Uh,
I think that's
I
actually
honestly,
very fair. I would not argue with that at all.
and I might even think of something like Alice in Wonderland that just has a lot of colors, a lot of cool creatures. So I think that, again, sometimes we think the wrong way about what the gateway is. We're trying to think too hard about like what are the lessons they take away. When a kid is little, they just want to enjoy what's on the screen and whatever makes their eyes light up. That's where I would start. And then I
That's
might
fair.
challenge them a little bit more with something like Princess and the Frog when I feel like they're ready, because there's a death in that is a little bit challenging.
That's fair.
And there's a villain that's a little bit scarier. So
Okay.
you ease in, like there's a lot of options. And the thing is, you don't need to jump straight to the Black Cauldron. You have time.
I love the Black
You know?
Cauldron.
It's great. No, it's great. And eventually they watch it, but
That
like
was
there's no reason not to start with something that's going to be a little bit more palatable at first. And then,
I think that's fair. But so
just I don't want to like ever really upset my kid, but I'm not worried about it with Disney movies. It's going to be other things that are going to make me worried there.
yeah, I can't think. I'm sure there are some Disney. No, I don't know. The Disney the Snow Queen is pretty scary, I think.
Oh, you mean the Wicked Queen from Snow White?
Yeah. That one's
She
pretty
is.
scary.
I watched Snow White. I'm like, dang, actually, this is pretty frightening, and the
Yeah.
ride scares a lot of kids at Disneyland.
Oh, the
so
ride. Well, they toned down the ride. They toned down the jump scare element of it.
They did,
Which
they
is
did, but
lame. They should have kept it the
Well,
same, in my
it's
opinion.
actually not as toned down as I thought it would be. It still captures the essence of the ride, but
I felt
they
like
did.
it was
You're right,
toned down.
because it was such a problem with it freaking kids out.
See, that's an example where I think that, like, that's an example where I don't think they should have changed the ride. I think they should have put up a sign that said this might be challenging. You know what I
Well,
mean? And that would
it
have been
is
so
there.
much cooler. I know, but like the sign is still there?
The sign has always been there. I mean,
There's a sign that says this is a scary ride?
Disney constantly tells that to people, but then they don't believe it because it's Snow White. So you can kind of like put that on the parents a little bit.
Yeah, and then I mean Disney's a company, so they have to deal with lawsuits, and that's a shame. Stupid capitalism.
Well, I don't even think it's a lawsuit thing so much as they don't want rides ruining the experience of people that might influence whether or not they come back or rewrite it.
Man, that'd be such a dumb reason to not come back to Disneyland.
Yeah, well, I mean, it certainly would, but
I know what you
it
mean,
comes
though.
down to,
That's
it's a
the
guest
business,
experience thing.
It's the business experience, or the business consideration. I understand that, but
Yeah.
but that's an example of something that I wish that we didn't censor stuff like that. I wish there was a place for kids to experience. Because think about that. I mean, there are a lot of kids that like more intense rides too at theme parks.
Definitely.
You know, and
Yeah,
I'm not even talking
again-
about like scary things. I mean, just like adrenaline. Big roller coasters. Some adults are like, I will never go on a roller coaster that goes upside down in my life.
Yeah, I'm huge on follow the pace of your child.
Follow,
You
yeah.
know,
I think that's the best moral to take.
it's
Listen,
like you
listen to
don't
your
have to
kid.
shelter. Yeah, listen to them. You know, like don't hide them from things that they are excited about. Um,
Give them options and listen to their results.
yeah, and I mean, if you're creating a very safe space where they feel comfortable telling you what their feelings are,
Yeah.
maybe they will be able to feel like they can say, "Yes, this is scaring me, but I still want to watch it." That they can explain the emotion to you. That's good
Yeah.
parenting.
So that's why I'm glad I brought that comment up earlier in this episode, is because I don't having you don't want your kid to feel like they can't tell you when they're being scared because they're afraid you're gonna not let them watch something. You know what I mean? Like if the kid wants to watch the thing within reason, I wanted to watch the first thing that Dad said he didn't want me to watch when I was a kid was The Exorcist.
Mhm.
Um, because I heard that it was at that time the scariest movie of all time. It was referred to as that. And, 10-year-old me was like, I'm pretty sure I can handle that. And actually in retrospect, I think Dad did let me start watching the movie. And I'm not even gonna lie, I didn't even get to the scary part because just the pacing and the way that it was shot and directed was so scary for the first 30 minutes that even though nothing happened, I was literally too scared to keep watching.
And you made the
And I
choice
made
that
the
I'm not
choice.
going to continue.
I think Dad would have let me watch it though.
Sure.
But
Well,
but
maybe
that's on
if you
him.
had really, if you'd really insisted, yeah. And I do think that he was right to say this is a bad idea because there are things that
He gave
you
me a
don't
warning.
want.
He
You
did
really
warn
don't
me.
want to like put something in front of a kid's eyes that is so shocking
Yeah.
versus what they're used to that it messes with them.
Now,
I really don't think that's good.
I'll close my note on that on this story too, because for me this highlights that really well. So I was probably like 3. This is one of my earliest memories actually. I was probably like 3 or 4 years old, and my dad was watching Jurassic Park, and Jurassic Park, like people get eaten by the dinosaurs. It is a like thriller horror film where people are like actively in danger and getting torn apart by dinosaurs, right?
Hmm.
And for a young kid, that could be traumatizing, seeing a person getting eaten off the toilet. You might never want to poop again. Um, but I knew my dad was watching the dinosaur movie. Honestly, the music by John Williams lured me into the living room because it was so mystifying. And I started like kind of snuck in behind my dad, and I started watching it behind him because he's sitting on the couch, and I'm like hovering behind him, just like, you know what I mean? Just like watching it behind his shoulder. And he didn't see me at first, but then as the movie keeps going on, I just walk a little bit closer, and apparently like I didn't know this at the time. I thought he didn't know I was there the whole time, but as an adult, he told me that he knew I was there the whole time and he just let me hang out. But so yeah, I was watching over his shoulder and I got closer. I'm sure Dad like looks out of the corner of his eye, just goes just keeps letting me watch. And then
Yeah.
apparently by the end of the movie, I was just sitting next to him on the couch and I had seen the whole thing. And to this day, Jurassic Park is in my top 10 favorite movies of all time. And even our parents, who clearly let us get away with and do a lot of things, even they told me that I maybe shouldn't watch that. And I pushed back on it, and I had one of the greatest movie watching experiences of my life.
Sure.
You know? So, flexibility. You never know when
Whereas
you're...
I saw the first 5 minutes of Jurassic Park 2 and I was like, I refuse to watch any more of this. This is way too much.
The first part of... Well, that's because... Okay, Jurassic Park 2 had a scarier intro because this kid got his fingers eaten off
We don't need to get into it.
Oh, it's not that bad. It happened off screen, but we see the mom see it happen and scream, and that's so much scarier because it leaves it up to your imagination.
Oh yeah, and trust me, my imagination ran wild. It freaked me the heck out.
Yeah, no, that was pretty scary. I remember that being scary. The Lost World was also a much darker film than the first one in terms of how it was shot.
Sure.
But yeah, no, I think that's a good note to... I feel like we kind of strayed off the rails from Coraline a little bit, but
Well, I had a feeling that was going to happen because let's be honest, everybody. Are we going to move from our current animated homes to Coraline?
dude, we already live in Oregon, so like,
Yeah, so that part of it is already going to be unoriginal.
yeah.
I think
if I lived in the desert, then yeah, I would move because I hate the desert and I would way rather live in the trees, even with this whole creepy other thing going on in my house. Also,
Fair,
there's
yeah,
a
you could
talking
just-
cat.
Okay. Oh yeah, we didn't even talk about the talking cat.
Yeah.
Which is
And
great,
truth be
great part
told,
of the film.
Like, I would maybe go through that in like, if you're telling me that I'd have to go through that entire horrifying experience just so that I can know that I spoke to a cat and that they and I kind of have an understanding for the rest of our lives, I'd go through it for that. 100%.
Fair enough. All right. Well, I still loved this conversation, even if it
Yeah.
wasn't like completely Coraline focused.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah, this is about
Again,
horror. This is a Halloween month, and
it
the
is.
podcast is going to get headier and headier in terms of these conversations as we go. So hopefully you liked this, because if not, whoops.
The truth is, if there's a place that we know is going to be very tough to live in, then the conversation will be about something else, but it will still
Yeah.
get into the reasoning why something may not be as appealing, or
Totally.
the philosophy behind it.
Yeah, we don't only want to cover things that have like the most well-developed, interesting worlds. So yeah, who knows what kind of interesting topics we'll get into that are still kind of location philosophy related. Because in a way, this discussion was just, how do you live based on the family you were born into? And that is a very environmental-based discussion still at the end of the day.
Yes, and we might just have an episode coming up soon about what pure isolation would be like, and I think that could be very interesting too.
Oh, do you have plans? That sounds interesting.
Do you think I should tell him?
Oh, do I know about this already?
You probably will have forgotten that I pitched it. I meant the audience, though. Should we tell the audience?
I mean, I don't remember what it is, so I don't know.
Courage the Cowardly Dog, everybody.
Oh,
We're going to talk
yes!
about Nowhere.
Yes, I just watched like 5 of those the other day. I just watched it
Perfect.
recently. Oh my god, I'm so excited. Stay tuned for next one, everybody. I don't know if the next one's going to be Courage or the other one that we teased earlier, but one of the two.
Indeed. All right.
Yeah.
Well, everybody, this has been fun, so thank you so much.